Urgent. Belarus is preparing for a battle with the Russian Federation. Lukashenko has sold out Putin to Washington. Belarus is turning its bayonets against the Kremlin. Mobilization has already been announced. Troops are being prepared for a fierce defense. Europe is surrendering to the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. Dozens of EU giants have been secretly turned into Kiev's rear factory. While Moscow trembled at NATO expansion, Ukraine made a bold move. Secret deals will launch a total rearmament that will grind the Russian army to dust. And we already have the details. Checkmate for Trump. Rutte has outsmarted the head of the White House. A secret plan to save Ukraine is already in motion. You won't believe what happened behind closed doors. Turkey is preparing an invasion of Israel, but unexpected details have emerged. Moscow held its breath after hearing this. More on all of this later in our broadcast. Hotspot. Lukashenko betrayed Putin. Belarus is turning its bayonets against the Russian Federation. Mobilization in Belarus has begun, but the goals are shocking. The army is preparing not for an attack, but for a fierce defense. Washington's secret game worked. The White House managed to turn Minsk to its side. The Kremlin's decisive plans are falling apart. Watch for the details. The Belarusian vodka just won't calm down.
Not only will we not survive, but neither will our subordinates.
Lukashenko is having another anxiety attack. The dictator demands his subordinates mobilize to keep the situation under control. Exactly which situation, though, is unclear.
We need to mobilize now to survive this difficult time, and an uncertain time at that.
He also stated that he doesn't know what to prepare the people for. The future remains uncertain, and it's impossible to predict the development of global processes.
As president, I don't know what to prepare you for. So we work to live. One slogan, we work to live. Not just to survive, but to live. And what's next? And next, nobody knows what will happen. What the powers that be will pull off next.
Earlier, on April 1st, Lukashenko stated that Belarus is preparing for war.
We are absolutely against war. Especially our officers, our soldiers, the armed forces, because we know what war is. We don't want war. But that's what an army is for. If suddenly someone decides to talk to us and look at us through the sights of a weapon, we will respond. That's what we're preparing for.
Since January, a large-scale, sudden, comprehensive readiness check of the armed forces has been underway in Belarus, initiated by Lukashenko. According to the self-proclaimed president, this was necessary to test how units would operate under wartime conditions.
The commitment of the armed forces to repel an enemy and the readiness to react instantly to any aggressive move toward our borders is the only guarantee of peace and state security.
Lukashenko, who has led Belarus for over 30 years, remains the Kremlin's main ally. In 2022, he offered his country's territory as a staging ground for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and now he has also hosted Russian tactical nuclear weapons. In effect, Belarus has become a key instrument in Moscow's military plans.
The idea is absolutely the same. You know our ideas. We know Russian ideas. It's one fatherland. From Brest to Vladivostok, we have one fatherland.
Lukashenko is not independent in making decisions regarding Belarus's participation, either direct participation in the war against Ukraine or, accordingly, the possibility of a repeat of the 2022 scenario. I'll explain what this is about. China views the Republic of Belarus as a zone of its military, political, and economic influence, as a springboard for further economic annexation on the European continent. Therefore, first and foremost, China is not interested in destabilizing the situation on the territory of the Republic of Belarus.
Recently, Lukashenko has also stepped up international contacts. Just recently, he visited the DPERC on an official visit, during which he held talks with the country's leader, Kim Jong-un. The parties discussed the further development of political, economic, and military cooperation, as well as issues of strengthening bilateral relations. Lukashenko has also established relations with Donald Trump. Belarus has officially joined Trump's conflict resolution initiative, and the US president himself stated that he looks forward to meeting with Lukashenko.
Lukashenko uses a well-known tactic, the so-called walking between the raindrops. That is, he tries to maneuver between the interests of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and the United States. He creates so-called centers of counterweights, which allows him to solve the main issue for himself, namely holding on to his own power, and accordingly the possibility of passing it on by inheritance. That is the main issue facing Lukashenko.
Any of Minsk's maneuvers in the diplomatic arena, dialogue with Washington, or contacts with Pyongyang are a strategy for the regime's survival. Lukashenko is looking for external resources and political alternatives, trying Kremlin. Europe is yielding to the pressure of the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. Dozens of EU factories are secretly working for Kiev. While the Kremlin was scaring the world with NATO expansion, Ukraine made a clever move and signed secret defense deals that turned Europe into our rear factory. This is a total rearmament that will grind the Russian army to dust. Watch for details.
Europe wants to survive, and without Ukraine, it won't succeed. Ukraine and Germany signed an agreement on Tuesday, April 14th, to share defense data with partners, which involves several joint projects. Under this memorandum, combat data will be used to analyze the performance of German missile systems. This will help increase their effectiveness and improve tactics, while Ukraine shares unique battlefield data with partners to train and improve AI models and analytical solutions. Moreover, Germany will send Ukraine a new military aid package. At the same time, Norway is also joining in. Ukraine and Norway have signed a declaration on defense partnership. The countries will take steps to promote closer cooperation between the defense industries of both nations, to develop new technologies and increase production volumes. And it is with Ukraine's help that Europe is strengthening its defense.
Because today, Ukraine, through its example, its participation, and its resistance to Russian aggression, has clearly shown Europe that the European continent as a whole, as well as the European Union, and including the European element of NATO itself, truly needs to have its own independent and reliable security coordinate system, a system that will help it withstand, endure, and respond to challenges and threats. That is, today Europeans, in my view, have largely realized that building a new security model, including at a global level, is impossible without Europe, and consequently, Europe cannot do without Ukraine.
As experts are convinced, the Ukrainian army is the most combat-ready on the European continent today. After so many years of war, especially the active phase of the Russo-Ukrainian war, this could form the basis of the so-called security architecture for all of Europe.
Another confirmation is the recent formal signing of agreements with Norway and Germany. And these are not just practical meaning. They clearly outline what, who, and how things will be done. Essentially, this is a...
Moreover, a dozen EU factories have taken up the production of Ukrainian weapons. Under the Build with Ukraine initiative, our defense companies have already established 11 joint ventures with foreign manufacturers. Everything produced jointly by Ukrainian and foreign arms manufacturers will go to the needs of the AFU, while Europe covers most of the financial costs. In this way, it is also investing in its own security.
And Ukraine, as I'm saying, Ukraine is the foundational state in this security system, with a combat-ready army, the best army in the world, with technical and weapons developments, with the prospect of developing various technologies that will be used, are already being used, and will be used in the near future during combat operations. And Europe's help, in my opinion, it's not that it will be, it won't be getting smaller, it will be increasing. Ukraine has something to offer for Europe's security.
But the question is there a benefit for Ukraine itself in such a case? After all, Europe is building its security at Kiev's expense. But at the same time, Ukraine is not yet welcome in NATO. As it turns out, there is, and a big one.
What does Ukraine get? Ukraine receives sovereign status. Ukraine receives financial support. Probably one of the largest in the world, even the very largest, yes. And this is an opportunity to develop our technologies to strengthen our security. Yes, essentially, it's the protection of Ukraine, first and foremost. We ourselves, with our own hands, with the help of Europeans, are building the defense of our state for every Ukrainian man and woman. So the benefits here are obvious.
Putin's demilitarization has failed. The Kremlin dictator was so afraid of NATO expansion that he now has an even stronger and better prepared Ukraine next door. And now he should fear not Western missiles, but missiles of Ukrainian production. Shock. Rutte has tamed Trump. The NATO chief found the golden key to the White House, a secret plan to save Ukraine that will change everything. You won't believe what's happening behind closed doors. The NATO chief forced Trump to play by his rules. Sensational details that were hidden. Watch. Forced to be cunning. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte found a loophole to help Ukraine.
Overall, things are normal at the moment, but we must also soberly and clearly understand that the longer the Russian-Ukrainian war lasts, the more negative consequences it may have, both for our country itself and if we're talking about the foreign policy factor.
Just recently, the United States reported that NATO members were outraged by Rutte's approving reaction to Donald Trump's decision. However, not everything is as clear-cut as it seems. In fact, the NATO chief is allegedly buttering up Trump so that he doesn't abandon Ukraine, which is at war with Russia, to its fate.
It demonstrates what the political realities are now in the United States of America itself. The challenge for Ukraine, that such an important strategic partner has changed. Just the situation in terms of support for our country and not for the better. And so, which is why Ukraine is now forced to look for alternatives. And in particular, President Zelensky's European tour, which is happening right now, it is also precisely connected to the fact that Ukraine is asking for more help from its European partners.
Support for Ukraine in circles like NATO is especially valuable, considering such statements from the United States.
One of the things I'm most proud of as an administration official is what we told Europe. If you want to buy weapons, buy them. But the United States is no longer buying or sending weapons to Ukraine. We have stepped out of this process.
Europe truly supports Ukraine to the best of its abilities.
And it seems to me that, in fact, we need to prepare for an even more difficult situation, given that, perhaps even America won't be able to fulfill its obligations, even on a commercial basis, especially if the conflict in the Middle East continues. Although the spending of US resources and assets on this particular military operation, in terms of both financial and material support, could certainly affect the supply of weapons to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, the American president is doing everything possible to tank his approval rating, which reached an all-time low in April 2026.
During the Cold War, the most important aspect was not just this issue of economic cooperation or even the economic protectorate of the United States over a number of different European countries and territories that did not fall under the influence or direct control of the Soviet Union during that period. But it was also, in many ways, a remarkable and powerful demonstration of America's own greatness, strength, and influence at that particular time in history. And after the conclusion of World War II, the United States truly undeniably became a global hegemon, a dominant superpower, which, so to speak, could essentially dictate, determine, and shape the terms and direction of world politics and international relations. And so, now, if this process stops happening, if this trend comes to an end, then the United States of America could potentially gradually slide backward, losing some of its previous influence and standing on the world stage.
Actually, Trump is indirectly helping Ukraine with his actions.
The U.S. House of Representatives elections are scheduled for November 3rd, 2026. Given the decline in support for Trump and consequently his team, a new team with diametrically opposite views could emerge in the American parliament. Breaking news: a Turkish hammer over Jerusalem. Erdogan has officially threatened an invasion. The world is on the brink of World War III. The countdown has begun. The Middle East is in flames. But unexpected details have surfaced. Moscow held its breath after hearing this. Watch for all the details.
A new conflict is brewing in the Middle East. Tensions are rising there between Turkey and Israel. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Turkish President Recep Erdogan of mass killings of his own Kurdish citizens and supporting the terrorist regime of Iran and its proxies. In turn, the Turkish Foreign Ministry didn't mince words either, calling Netanyahu the Hitler of our time.
we see that Israel may seek to declare Turkey a new adversary after Iran, as it cannot exist without an enemy.
The hostility between the two powerful nations could lead to almost open confrontation, some military analysts say. The situation escalated further last weekend when many media outlets, citing the British publication The Telegraph, published materials where Erdogan allegedly even threatened an invasion of Tel Aviv, to which he immediately received a sharp response from the Israeli National Security Minister.
Erdogan, do you understand English? Fuck you!
It seemed that the conflict was now inevitable. Turkey, which has the second largest army in the North Atlantic Alliance, will not tolerate this. However, as is often the case in pursuit of sensational headlines, Western media significantly jumped the gun. Instead of military accusations and verbal threats against each other, we
reject any scenario that drags the states of the region into a destructive conflict.
Russia was particularly upset by the statement of the Turkish foreign minister. Kremlin propaganda has long been dreaming of how to drive a wedge between two Ukrainian allies. On one hand, Turkey, which did not recognize Putin's annexation of Crimea and despite everything continues to build a navy for Kyiv. And on the other, Israel, which quietly helps the armed forces of Ukraine with weapons, intelligence, and its technologies. If the two rivals clashed in a fight, all this weaponry would not have flown overheads to the Russian occupiers, but towards Ankara and Tel Aviv. But fortunately, Erdogan and Netanyahu are not that reckless.
Turkey will continue to use all diplomatic tools to counter this. In today's world, the battlefield is not only physical, but also informational. We live in an era where the narrative has become just as important and just as fiercely contested as real events on the ground. Narratives are used as weapons to shape perception, interpretation of reality, and all too often to hide the truth itself. So,
Israel and Turkey intend to fight exclusively in the informational and diplomatic fields.
Turkish-Israeli relations remain tense and essentially competitive, especially in the context of Israel's policy of encircling Turkey in the Mediterranean through cooperation with Greece and the Greek administration of southern Cyprus. In response, Turkey's growing influence in the Horn of Africa region and in the Sahel in both the military and political spheres. This creates space in Israel's rear and undermines this policy of encirclement. Thus, every step by one side triggers a counterstep by the other. The struggle continues.
So a military conflict between Ankara and Tel Aviv is off the table, no matter how much some might want it. The Turkish Center for Combating Disinformation stated that claims of Erdogan threatening Israel with invasion are fake, and the Telegraph, which spread the sensational news, based its report on Erdogan's statements from 2 years ago, taken out of context. By the way, the publication's website has also been deleted by now.
Donetsk is held by Ukrainian forces. The enemy's logistics are wrecked. Magyar and Russian Federation. Panic in Russian headquarters. Things are heating up. The moment of truth has arrived. The Belgorod buffer zone is just the beginning. Ukrainian retribution is flying into the very heart of the enemy. All the details are in the report.
The armed forces of Ukraine are pushing. The Kremlin is in shock.
This is what defense looks like. The desire for freedom and justice. This is what quality, accuracy, and long-range capability look like. In
large part, the reason is the latest drone technologies. As part of reducing the offensive potential of the Ukrainian defense forces, struck a number of important targets. Warehouses and a drone storage site near the Donetsk airport were hit. In the areas of Azovsky in the Zaporizhzhia region and Orzuf and Kulikivsky in the Donetsk region, enemy ammunition depots were exploding.
There are many questions about how quickly we can update our strike systems. The time when we had to buy products is long gone. Everyone understands this well.
In the village of Horn in the occupied Donetsk region, a community center was hit where Russian occupiers were stationed along with ammunition. Listen to it popping here. Drones, from Ukraine flew over 1,500 kilometers to the Republic of Bashkortostan, with Sterlitamak under attack. This is one of the centers of Russia's chemical and petrochemical industries. The Syntes Kautschuk plant was hit there. This is one of the key elements of Bashkortostan's petrochemical cluster, linked to large entities like Bashneft. Ukrainian drones and missiles are increasingly reaching the Belgorod region. This time, fuel and ammunition depots in the village of Valuyki were hit. Locals saw how it blazed. The Belgorod region has long since turned into a buffer zone, but when residents spoke about it last year, they weren't really listened to. Now this is being confirmed on the air as well.
It's very upsetting that we are turning the Belgorod region into a buffer zone, although it seemed like this wasn't the plan at all.
Russians didn't even suspect they'd be treated this way, but Putin saved them here too. Besides Ukraine's successful attacks, corruption in the Russian Ministry of Defense has done its part.
I understand that, of course, Belousov can report to Vladimir Vladimirovich, but this problem hasn't been solved. I can say that after 1,500 days of war, we haven't created what you'd call, well, that very infrastructure.
The enemy absolutely has nowhere to hide. Nowhere to hide at all.
In Poland, the economy was growing at rates above the global average, and the West was worried that their measures weren't working, the containment, and so it's a war of attrition, so to speak. For various reasons, I don't want to talk about it yet again. So accordingly, it's no longer a fact that this trump card works in our favor. In
Russia, the recruitment of contract soldiers for the war in Ukraine has decreased. This is reported by
Russian troops recruited from 800 to 1,000 soldiers a day in the first quarter of 2026. Compared to 1,000 to 1,200 a day in the first quarter of 2025, this is 20% less compared to... Even regional increases in one-time signing bonuses couldn't prevent the slowdown in recruit enrollment.
At the same time, on Russia TV, they say that there's supposedly human resources, but the resources are already exhausted.
The guys are coming, the guys...
They're coming. The Russians are getting the leftovers of BTR-70, BMP, and in some places even tanks. Some things can still be restored, but the Kremlin understands that the endless supplies of equipment have run out through the centralization of drones. But even there, not everything is so smooth. 2 years ago, a new military specialty appeared unofficially. They're called legs. Soldier. At the same time, Ukrainian forces counterattacking, destroying the enemy both in the rear and on the front line.
Sensational news immediately after the victory, Peter Magyar began to act. He burst into power with a historic triumph and on the very first day laid out on the table secret trump cards which made the Kremlin, Magyar showed his fangs. Hungary has officially turned 180 degrees. See the details?
Hungary chooses Europe well, and for the Kremlin only a message remains. Russians go home.
The Russian market as a whole, overall, in general.
Hungary celebrates, and the leader of the opposition, TISA, Peter Magyar, assures that his country will again be a reliable partner in the EU and NATO.
Hungary will again be a reliable ally, representing Hungarian interests, because our place was, is, and will be in Europe.
The words are very inspiring. More than 15 years of gradual distancing from the European Union. But is it worth celebrating Peter Magyar's victory yet, as it's bittersweet for Ukraine? Why is that? We'll figure it out now. But first we need to understand what Magyar himself represents. A few more words. And now a hero for many, who is cutting off the path to Putin from his comfortable seat. Yes.
Orban, whose wife was a minister, was known for his unique approach to leadership. Orban in particular stood out in many ways.
This is the first thing you need to know about Peter Magyar. He started as an associate of Viktor Orban and was a member of the ruling Fidesz party. He worked as a lawyer and for some time served in the Hungarian representation at the EU. His ex-wife Judith Varga until recently held the post of Minister of Justice. In 2023, the couple separated. And at the beginning of 2024, when they were already divorced, a political scandal broke out in Hungary related
to the director of one of the state orphanages, convicted of covering up the crimes of his boss, who was involved in pedophilia. It was Varga's signature as Minister of Justice that was on the presidential pardon decree. This scandal forced Magyar's ex-wife, along with the head of state, Katalin Novak, to resign, and Peter Magyar only then left the Fidesz party, using the incident to sharply criticize the system and the party. As for Ukraine, Magyar cannot be called a fully pro-Ukrainian politician. He opposes providing military aid to Ukrainians and does not support Kyiv's accelerated entry into the EU. However, Magyar, though not immediately, recognized Russia's actions as aggression and also visited Kyiv in 2024. All this could be a good start for a reset of Ukrainian-Hungarian relations.
As I understand it, the rhetoric now will be about renewing friendship. That's also good. Here, most likely, it coincided again that Europe also needs to renew friendship. And it didn't need to be renewed before the election results, so as not to play into Orban's hands. Therefore, in the near future, I think the transition will continue. And this is a good start for new relations with Hungary. And so, in response to this action, basically, Magyar will have a good political basis to at least unblock the decision on the 90 billion loan for Ukraine.
On the bright side, the number of vetoes from Hungary at EU meetings could indeed drop sharply. But the threat of blockades from Budapest still remains. Because even though the ruling party has changed, the dependence on Russian energy resources remains the same.
Over 15 years, Orban has indeed placed a great emphasis on the Russian Federation, on Russian energy resources, on refineries, in which he made money because it's great to buy raw materials cheaper in Russia and sell them at a high price in Europe. Well, plus transit revenues. Therefore, it wasn't worth counting on whoever comes after Orban to give up Russian energy resources and their transit to Europe.
This means that Putin has a lever of pressure. Moreover, considering that Magyar himself has already stated he will negotiate with Putin on energy resources and energy dependence on Russia, will persist for Hungary. At the same time, the politician added that supposedly they will negotiate, but they won't be friends. But for how long?
But if Putin has even a small possibility of influence over some European country, to complicate decision-making, he will use that opportunity. And when Putin has an energy card on which the stability of an entire state basically depends, it's naive to think that Putin won't use it. At some point, there will indeed be a very strong and significant temptation to obtain a large, potentially corrupt shadow margin from such transit, and essentially replace Orban in his seat.
But Magyar still has a chance to take a different path. And there's great hope in this case for the Hungarian people who are tired of Russia and want independence from the Kremlin. But it's too early to paint an optimistic future for Ukraine. Hungary, even under a Magyar premiership, remains dependent on the Russian Federation. And just how strong this dependency will be, only time will tell. That's all for now. Well, for more of the latest hot news from the front, watch our next episode.